Date. That's right, we have our next live guest and someone I'm excited about because we got to catch up in Arkansas. We are going to welcome on Dr. excuse me, Dr. Andrew Balthrop from University of Arkansas Research Associate. Andrew, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Anthony.
So Andrew, we're talking about safety, National Safety Week. It's coming up here soon. There's going to be a focus on will ends. What's going to be around that focus coming up here?
Yeah, so the FMCSA does a bunch of inspection blitzes through the year, and going on right now, right, is one of them, where they're at these inspection blitzes, these roadside inspection blitzes. They pull over a bunch of trucks, and they have a kind of a theme that they're focused on, and this year is wheels.
And can you tell us a little bit about that decision to focus on wheel ends? We were just talking with John Gallagher and Thomas Wasson about the increased reports of truck crash deaths report released from NHTSA. Can you tell us about if wheel ends maybe have anything to do with that, and if that's the reason why the FMCSA is focusing on them?
This is actually not something I know very much about. I've done a bunch of research on these blitzes, and I've looked at blitzes in the past, particularly between 2012 and 2016. But none of those were actually focused on wheel ends. In the past, you've had some that have been focused on ELDs. The brake system is a common one, but this is the first one I think I'm aware of where they're actually focused on the wheels.
And it seems like clockwork. Every time this week comes up, drivers just take the week off anyway. When you're looking at this pseudo phenomenon that happens, does this make roads less safe?
This is sort of the interesting thing about these roadside inspections that drew me to studying this in the first place, because it's strange. You hear all this anecdotal evidence that during these roadside inspection blitzes, that a lot of the smaller carriers, they just schedule their vacations and they disappear from the roadways. I was looking at inspection data as part of this research project, and you see that with the inspection blitzes actually relative to a normal time or relative to an unannounced inspection blitz. You see about 5% of the one vehicle carriers, of the single fleet carriers, owner operators, just disappear essentially. That they're not on the road on those particular days. And that kind of led me to wonder, what the FMCSA is actually accomplishing with this inspection blitz, right? You announce it, and then maybe some of the people that you wanted to inspect actually aren't going to be around for it. They can avoid it because you've announced the inspection blitz. And it's kind of an interesting result the more you dig into it, that it's sort of a clever strategy, is that the inspection blitz really wasn't intended, I guess, for these smaller carriers. It's more to get the larger carriers to comply and make sure that their vehicles are up to standard and there's nothing wrong with them. So by announcing them beforehand, these larger carriers, they can't all of a sudden disappear. They can't not do business for a couple days. And by announcing it ahead of time, they get compliant ahead of time. They make sure all of their fleets are in tip-top shape. You see this before and after, is that the actual number of violations that you would expect, given the number of inspections they have, it goes down. And this is sort of long-lasting, especially with vehicle violations, is that you see the trucks, in effect, get closer to the standard as a result of these blitzes.
Andrew, I'm interested on if there's any data around how many inspections are being done on those smaller groups with smaller fleets outside of this Road Track Week versus inside of the Road Track Week. You mentioned that it's more kind of targeted at those bigger fleets because they can't afford to not do business. They're still just going to do business anyways. But do we see that reflected in the data outside of this week?
Yeah, so the FMCSA has an issue here about they kind of lack the inspection resources to really inspect every truck every year. Is that there's 4 or 5 million trucks on the road. The FMCSA will do 2 or 3 million inspections. I worked out the stats on this, is that it's not uncommon for you to, from a driver's perspective anyway, to be able to go, a year, maybe 2 years without an inspection. so they don't really have the regulatory intensity to, to really incentivize, people to, provide those incentives for people to comply completely with regulation. So how do you do this in this environment? The way these inspections normally work is, they're triggered by the inspection selection system. And, this system is random in part, but it's also based on, your previous inspection history and whether you might have had bad inspections. Now, this system is sort of more targeted, right, from if from a driver's perspective. If you work for you're an owner operator, you work for a small carrier, you're more likely to be inspected on that particular day. But from a firm perspective, because large firms have so many trucks, right? Large carriers have so many trucks, is that they get inspected much more routinely. So you have sort of this paradox, right? Is that both the owner operators, right, and the employer operators, right, the big carriers, can both say is that, well, inspections are kind of unfairly biased towards us, right? Is that if you're a driver working for an owner operator, you're more likely to get inspected than a driver working for a large carrier. But large carriers have much more dense inspection histories than the smaller carriers.
And Andrew, when looking at this list and some of those that get followed as it continues to kind of maybe pop up or get flagged, does it follow the drivers as they move to different carriers per se, or does it just kind of stay with those specific carriers?
I believe that it is carriers, but that's actually an interesting question. Particularly something I hadn't thought of. Particularly when you talk about driver-related violations, right? The hours of service, or the that kind of thing.
All right, Andrew. Well, thank you for being with us today. Great to have you as always, and we'll check in with you with your research and what's going on in the University of Arkansas, I'm sure, as we head throughout the next few days. Anthony, it's time now to move towards one of our brand new segments here on FreightWaves Now, and we're super excited to have Isaiah Buchanan with us for a look at today's Social Roundup.